South Korea and the U.S. are holding their largest joint military exercises on the Korean peninsula, in years to practice fighting a war against an increasingly hostile North Korea. The BBC was given rare access to the country's Joint Control Center. But what is the purpose of these war games in? Could they backfire? Deep in a military bunker outside Seoul, two Air Force colonels sit shoulder to shoulder. One is American, the other South Korean. Together, their eyes scour satellite pictures of North Korea, played out on giant screens at the front of the dark room. The images are one of many sources of intelligence fed into the classified vault. And quote, we have the ability to detect the instant a North Korean missile gets off the ground, and quote, explains Col. Anthony Kaczynski, who runs the operations center for the U.S. side. After that, an algorithm predicts where that missile might be heading. And quote, then, with my terrible Korean, and his excellent English, we can reach a decision quickly, and quote, he adds, pointing to his South Korean counterpart, Colonel So. This operations center on the U.S. Osan Air Base is unique as the only place in the world where two militaries work in harmony to defend one country. This is the commitment the United States gave South Korea after the Korean War ended almost 70 years ago without a peace treaty. The country's air forces, armies, navies, space and cyber operations are coordinated in this one room, its current importance highlighted when Joe Biden became the first U.S. president to visit in May. This week, for the first time in 4 years, the two militaries will run field exercises to practice how they would respond to a North Korean attack. Such exercises, though once routine, were cancelled in 2018 as the U.S. and South Korea tried to convince the North to get rid of its nuclear weapons. But after years of diplomatic stalemate, and faced with an increasingly hostile North Korea, both countries have decided it's time to resume training. North Korea has fired more missiles this year than in any other single year, and its weapons are becoming increasingly sophisticated. They appear more able to evade defenses and hit their targets. Meanwhile, intelligence suggests it's on the cusp of conducting its seventh nuclear test, which it may use to perfect a smaller, battlefield nuclear weapon that could be used in a conflict against South Korea. Add to this a slew of recent warnings from North Korean leader Kim Jong-un that he is prepared to use his nukes against the South. All considered, Seoul seems ever more at risk, and defending the South Korean capital is one of the scenarios the forces are practicing. The 9-day exercises, named Ulchi Freedom Shield, will draw in aircraft, warships and tanks. They will wargame not only how to repel a North Korean attack, but also how to strike back at the enemy. And quote, I can't teach this in a classroom, it is an art, and quote, says Colonel Kaczynski. And quote, I have to run people through it, creating the most intense environment I can. The Korean peninsula is not very big, so the time we have to act is very limited. End quote. But there is concern that these exercises will provoke North Korea, which views them as a rehearsal for an invasion. The mere news that they were restarting led Mr. Kim to accuse the U.S. and South Korea of bringing the peninsula to the brink of war. It is feared Pyongyang could retaliate by testing more missiles, conducting its much-anticipated nuclear test, or even initiating a small-scale skirmish. South Korea's Defense Vice Minister Shin Bomchul told the BBC it's unfair to accuse them of antagonizing North Korea, and the drills should not be blamed for any future military action by the North. End quote. They know these drills are defensive, they just use them as an excuse, end quote. He said. End quote. They will carry out provocations for their own military and political aims, so we cannot listen to their criticism. End quote. At the airbase, above ground, a U.S. fighter pilot, Capt. Abby Walters, was preparing for training. She explained how flying with South Koreans makes her more efficient. And quote, "The communication is much smoother in the air if we've practiced together, so we can go quicker and be more deadly in our job." End quote. But some question whether South Korea, even with U.S. help, would be able to defend itself if the North fired a nuclear weapon. A report earlier this year concluded that a missile attack by Pyongyang would have a high probability of success. Despite the current defenses in place, the head of Air Force at Osan Air Base, Lt. General Scott Plaius, strongly refuted this. When asked about the progress North Koreans are making, he responded confidently, end quote, "And so are we." End quote. These drills are as much about showcasing strength, to try to stop North Korea from ever using its weapons. Seoul has warned that if Pyongyang were to test a nuke, it would unleash a end quote, high-intensity end quote, response. U.S. bombers and other weapons would be sent to South Korea, Vice Minister Shin confirmed, and Seoul, along with Washington, would impose further sanctions. End quote. There is never a 100% guarantee with missile defenses, but we can thwart their ambition to attack us, end quote, he said. South Korea doesn't have nuclear weapons of its own. It is protected by what is known as a nuclear umbrella, an agreement that the United States would use its nuclear weapons to defend Seoul if necessary. It's hoped this is enough to prevent North Korea from ever launching an attack, but it's a concept South Koreans are increasingly uncomfortable with. A poll this year showed 71% of people supported the country developing its own nuclear weapons, even though the president here says there are no plans to do so. As the thinking goes, if North Korea has nuclear weapons capable of reaching the U.S. mainland, could it not threaten the United States and convince it to stay out of a conflict with South Korea, just as Vladimir Putin hinted he would use nuclear weapons in Ukraine? Would the U.S. really forfeit San Francisco for Seoul? Lieutenant General Plaius sought to assuage those fears. End quote. That you have 28,500 U.S. servicemen and women stationed on this peninsula every single day, should give people the unbelievably comfortable feeling that we are here to stay and we are here to protect them. End quote. These drills, meant to deter North Korea, could well end up provoking it, or at least provide the smokescreen for it to test and improve its weaponry. But faced with an increasingly formidable foe, the United States and South Korea believe they have little choice but to prepare.